I pulled into the TechFlow Industries parking lot that Tuesday morning with butterflies dancing in my stomach, clutching my favorite travel mug filled with vanilla latte. 5 years of dedication had finally paid off with news of working under the new engineering director. The elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor, and there he stood. Bradley Carson, immaculate in his charcoal suit, flashed a predatory smile that made my skin crawl. "I'm the new director. Consider yourself already replaced," he announced, extending termination papers like a death sentence. Security appeared instantly. The drive home blurred through tears as Austin traffic crawled around me. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone, speed dialing my sister Emma while pulling into my driveway. She answered on the 2nd ring, her voice immediately shifting to concern when she heard my sobbing. "Hattie, what happened? You sound terrible." "I got fired, Em. On my first day with the new director. He just handed me papers and had security walk me out like I was some kind of criminal." The words tumbled out between gasps as I sat in my Honda Civic, unable to move. Emma's paralegal training kicked in immediately. "Did you sign anything? Severance papers? Non-disclosure agreements?" "No." I was too shocked. I just left. I wiped my nose with a tissue from the glove compartment, feeling utterly defeated. "Good. Don't sign anything until I look at your employment contract. Do you still have the original?" 20 minutes later, Emma sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she examined every clause of my hiring agreement. The afternoon sun streamed through my windows, illuminating the papers that would change everything. "Hattie, when did you negotiate these intellectual property clauses?" Emma's voice carried a note of surprise. I rarely heard from my usually composed sister. "I didn't really negotiate anything. Thomas Wright handled all the legal stuff when they recruited me from MIT. I just wanted to start working." I poured myself another cup of coffee, remembering those exciting early days 5 years ago. TechFlow had pursued me aggressively after my graduate thesis on artificial intelligence optimization caught attention in academic circles. The company specialized in predictive analytics software, and they needed someone with my particular expertise in machine learning algorithms. Thomas Wright, their patent attorney at the time, had insisted on specific language protecting any innovations I might develop. Emma read aloud from Section 12. "Any patents filed during employment period with employee listed as primary inventor shall maintain joint ownership status, with equal rights and responsibilities shared between employee and employer." "What does that actually mean?" I asked, though something in my chest began to flutter with possibility. "It means you own half of anything you invented while working there. Most companies make employees sign away all rights, but this is different." Emma's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard. "When did you file patents?" My memory focused as I recalled the patent applications from 2 years earlier. 3 separate filings for revolutionary AI technologies that had taken months of research and development. The predictive analytics enhancement that could forecast market trends with 97% accuracy. The machine learning optimization protocol that reduced processing time by 80%. The data processing acceleration system that transformed how companies handled massive information sets. I filed 3 patents in 2023, but I never paid attention to ownership details. The company handled everything through their legal department. The implications began dawning on me as Emma continued typing. "Hattie, these patents are listed as the foundation technology for TechFlow's flagship product line. According to their annual report, this represents 70% of their total revenue." Emma's voice grew more excited with each discovery. We spent the next hour diving deeper into patent databases and company filings. My innovations had become the cornerstone of TechFlow's success, generating millions in licensing fees from major corporations. But there was something else. Something I had almost forgotten in the chaos of the day. "Oh my God, Emma. I filed another patent application last month." My heart started racing as the memory surfaced. "It's for quantum computing interface technology. Something completely revolutionary that could change how computers process information." Emma's eyes widened as she pulled up the patent office database. Hattie, TechFlow, announced this quantum technology as their next major product launch to investors 3 weeks ago. They're taking pre-orders from Fortune 500 companies. The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. Bradley Carson hadn't fired me for performance issues. He had eliminated me to avoid paying licensing fees on future patents. But in his arrogance, He had made a fatal miscalculation. Pull up that database again. Check the status of my quantum computing patent. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, and then she went completely still. Hattie, according to this, your quantum computing patent application was flagged for expedited review due to national security implications. It's scheduled for approval within 30 days. I stared at my sister, understanding flooding through me like ice water. If they fired me before the patent gets approved, and I'm listed as the primary inventor, then you'll own 50% of technology they've already promised to deliver to major clients. Technology they've built their entire expansion strategy around. Technology they've accepted advance payments for. Emma's legal mind was already calculating the implications. What do I do? Emma closed the laptop and looked at me with the same protective expression she'd worn when we were kids and neighborhood bullies picked on me for being the quiet, smart girl. We call Thomas Wright. Thomas Wright's law office occupied the 20th floor of a gleaming downtown Austin high-rise, with panoramic views of Lady Bird Lake stretching toward the hill country. I hadn't seen him since my initial hiring 5 years earlier, but he greeted Emma and me with the same warm professionalism I remembered. I've reviewed your employment contract 3 times since you called yesterday, Thomas began, settling behind his mahogany desk. Bradley Carson made several critical errors that could expose TechFlow to massive liability. His paralegal, Janet Martinez, entered with thick folders of research materials. Her efficient manner and sharp eyes suggested she'd been busy since our emergency appointment request. First, let's address the termination itself, Thomas continued, opening the top folder. Your firing was classified as for cause due to alleged performance issues, but Janet found no documentation supporting this claim. No written warnings, no performance improvement plans, no negative reviews. In fact, your last evaluation rated you as exceeding expectations in all categories. Janet spread out additional documents across the conference table. I also researched Bradley Carson's employment history. He was hired from a failed startup called Innovate Tech, which collapsed last year amid patent theft allegations. He has a pattern of joining companies and systematically eliminating high-value employees. Thomas leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. The intellectual property situation is where this becomes truly significant. Under your contract, TechFlow cannot use your patents without your explicit permission and must pay equal licensing fees for any revenue generated. What kind of revenue are we talking about? Emma asked, her paralegal instincts engaging. Janet consulted her notes. For the past 2 years, your 3 patents have generated approximately $8 million in direct licensing fees. Under the joint ownership clause, TechFlow owes you $4 million in unpaid royalties. The number hit me like a physical blow. $4 million. I'd been working for base salary while my innovations generated millions I never knew about. But there's more, Thomas continued, his voice taking on the tone he used for delivering devastating legal arguments. Janet discovered something during her research that changes everything. Janet opened another folder, revealing contracts with corporate logos I recognized immediately. TechFlow has been sublicensing your patents to 3 major technology companies: DataCorp, Cloud Tech Solutions, and InnovateSoft. These sublicensing agreements began 18 months ago. Thomas picked up the thread. These sublicensing deals have generated $52 million in revenue for TechFlow. Under your contract's joint ownership clause, you're entitled to half of all licensing income, including sublicensing fees. The room spun slightly as I processed this information. $26 million? $26 million that legally belongs to you, Thomas confirmed. Bradley Carson fired you to avoid paying these fees, but he didn't understand that terminating you doesn't void your patent ownership. Emma whistled softly. What about the quantum computing patent? Janet flipped to another section of her research. I called the patent office this morning using Hattie's authorization. The quantum computing patent will be approved within 30 days due to its national security applications. The technology has potential military and defense uses, which expedited the review process. Thomas stood and walked to his window, gazing out at the Austin skyline. If that patent gets approved while you maintain joint ownership, you'll possess half of what industry experts estimate could be worth hundreds of millions. Technology companies are already bidding against each other for quantum computing advances. So what's our next step? I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of the situation. We send formal notice to CEO Richard Donovan demanding immediate reinstatement and payment of all owed licensing fees. We also request a full accounting of all revenue generated by your patents. Thomas returned to his desk with renewed energy. But first, Janet has one more discovery that will shock them into compliance. Janet opened the final folder with barely contained excitement. While researching the sublicensing agreements, I found documentation showing that TechFlow has been marketing your quantum computing technology to potential clients for the past 6 months. They've accepted advance payments totaling $15 million for technology they don't legally own yet. Emma leaned back in her chair, shaking her head in amazement. They're selling something that doesn't belong to them. It gets worse, Janet continued. The contracts with DataCorp, CloudTech, and InnovateSoft all include clauses requiring guaranteed access to future innovations. If TechFlow can't deliver your quantum computing technology, they'll face penalty payments of $20 million per contract. Thomas began drafting the demand letter on his computer as he spoke. Bradley Carson thought he was eliminating a costly employee. Instead, he created a situation where TechFlow faces potential bankruptcy if they don't resolve this immediately. What if they refuse to negotiate? I asked. Thomas smiled grimly. Then we file suit for wrongful termination, breach of contract, and fraud. But I don't think it will come to that. When their legal department realizes the scope of their exposure, they'll be desperate to settle. As we left Thomas's office that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard you got fired today. Probably for the best. Company doesn't need troublemakers, Bradley. Emma read over my shoulder and grinned. He has no idea what's coming. Richard Donovan was reviewing quarterly projections in the TechFlow boardroom when his assistant burst through the doors, clearly flustered despite her usual composure. Sir, you need to read this immediately, she said, handing him an official legal document that had arrived by courier minutes earlier. Richard scanned the letterhead from Wright, Harrison, and Associates, then began reading Thomas's carefully crafted demand letter. His face grew pale as he processed each devastating paragraph outlining TechFlow's massive financial exposure. Get Susan Park on the phone right now, he ordered, referring to the company's chief legal counsel, and cancel my afternoon meetings. Within an hour, the executive conference room filled with TechFlow's leadership team. Susan Park arrived with her own stack of legal documents, having spent the intervening time frantically reviewing Hattie's original employment contract. This is a catastrophe, Susan announced without preamble. The intellectual property clauses in this contract are ironclad. If Hattie Richardson exercises her rights, we're looking at potential bankruptcy. Bradley Carson lounged in his chair with characteristic arrogance. She's just a disgruntled employee making empty threats. Our legal team can handle one bitter engineer. Susan fixed him with a withering stare. Your bitter engineer owns 50% of the patents that generate 70% of our revenue. She also owns half of technology we've already promised to deliver to major clients. Harold Kim, the HR director, shifted nervously as attention turned to him. I approved Bradley's termination request based on his assessment of performance issues. All the documentation seemed proper. What documentation? Susan demanded. I've reviewed Hattie's employment file. There are no performance complaints, no disciplinary actions, nothing to justify termination for cause. Bradley's confident facade began showing cracks. Her work quality had declined significantly. She wasn't meeting project deadlines. Her last performance review was 6 weeks ago, Harold replied, consulting his laptop. She received the highest possible ratings in every category. Her supervisor specifically noted that her quantum computing research was ahead of schedule. Richard's phone rang, displaying the caller ID for DataCorp's chief technology officer. He answered with growing dread. Richard, we need to talk, came the voice of Marcus Williams, DataCorp's CTO. Our legal department received some disturbing information about potential patent ownership disputes. We need assurance that our licensing agreements remain valid. Marcus, I'm sure we can resolve any misunderstandings quickly, Richard replied, gesturing frantically for Susan to take notes. Misunderstandings? Richard, we've invested $40 million in infrastructure based on access to your AI technology. If there are ownership questions, we'll have grounds for breach of contract claims. Our board is meeting tonight to discuss suspension of all payments pending resolution. The call ended abruptly, leaving the room in tense silence. Within minutes, similar calls arrived from Cloud Tech Solutions and InnovateSoft, each expressing urgent concerns about the patent situation. Susan consulted her legal files with increasing alarm. The sublicensing agreements contain strict clauses requiring clear ownership of all technology. If our corporate partners lose confidence in our patent rights, they can trigger immediate contract cancellations. How much exposure are we talking about? Richard asked, though he suspected the answer would be devastating. Between the sublicensing deals and the advance payments for quantum computing delivery, we're looking at approximately $90 million in immediate liability if contracts get canceled. That doesn't include the $26 million in unpaid licensing fees we already owe Hattie. Bradley finally seemed to grasp the severity of the situation. There has to be a legal way to challenge her patent claims. She was just one member of larger development teams. Susan opened another file folder with grim determination. I've reviewed all the patent applications. Hattie Richardson is listed as the sole primary inventor on every filing. Her research notebooks, email records, and development documentation clearly establish her as the original creator of all three technologies. What about the quantum computing patent that hasn't been approved yet? Harold asked. According to the Patent Office, approval is imminent due to national security applications. Once approved, she'll own 50% of technology we've already contracted to deliver. Technology that represents our entire growth strategy for the next 5 years. Richard loosened his tie as the full implications became clear. Bradley, explain to me exactly why you decided to terminate our most valuable employee without consulting legal or reviewing her contract. Bradley's characteristic swagger disappeared entirely. I was streamlining operations, eliminating high-cost personnel to improve profit margins. I planned to bring in my former team at lower salaries. Your former team? Susan's voice carried dangerous undertones. The team from Innovate Tech that folded amid patent theft allegations? Those charges were never proven, Bradley protested weakly. Susan consulted yet another document. Harold, when you processed Bradley's hiring, did you conduct standard background checks? Harold's face reddened. Bradley came highly recommended. His experience seemed perfectly suited for our expansion plans. A background check would have revealed that Innovate Tech is currently under federal investigation for industrial espionage. Bradley's previous company attempted to steal patented technology from competitors before their collapse. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Richard's phone buzzed with an urgent text message that made his hands tremble. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. Directors want immediate explanation of patent crisis threatening company survival. Susan gathered her documents with renewed urgency. We have approximately 18 hours to prevent total corporate collapse. I recommend we contact Hattie Richardson's attorney immediately and negotiate whatever terms necessary to resolve this situation. Bradley made one final desperate attempt to maintain control. She's probably willing to settle for a modest severance package. Most employees don't understand the true value of their innovations. Richard stared at him with barely contained fury. Bradley, you just handed our most valuable intellectual property to someone who now has every reason to destroy us. And based on what I'm learning about your background, I'm beginning to suspect this disaster wasn't accidental incompetence. As the meeting dissolved into crisis management planning, none of them realized that their conversation was about to become the least of their problems. Federal investigators were already reviewing Bradley's activities, and Hattie's case was about to uncover a conspiracy that reached far beyond simple corporate mismanagement. Agent Robert Taylor of the FBI's Corporate Fraud Division received Susan Park's report on a Tuesday morning that would reshape multiple careers and companies. Her decision to report Bradley's document forgery was motivated by corporate liability protection rather than justice, but the implications extended far beyond TechFlow's immediate crisis. Agent Taylor had spent 15 years investigating white-collar crimes, and Bradley Carson's pattern triggered every instinct developed through decades of complex cases. The preliminary investigation revealed connections to industrial espionage networks that surprised even experienced federal prosecutors. Mrs. Richardson, thank you for meeting with us. Agent Taylor began as Hattie, Emma, and Thomas gathered in the FBI's downtown Austin office. Your termination appears connected to a broader conspiracy involving multiple companies and potentially foreign interests. Hattie felt surreal disorientation as federal agents treated her firing as evidence in a national security investigation. The sterile conference room with its recording equipment and official documents seemed disconnected from her simple desire to return to work. Bradley Carson's employment history reveals systematic targeting of technology companies with valuable intellectual property, Agent Taylor continued, spreading photographs and employment records across the table. In each case, he gained access to proprietary research, eliminated key personnel, then facilitated technology transfers before company collapse. Thomas reviewed the documented evidence with professional fascination. How many companies are we discussing? 6 companies over the past 8 years. Combined losses exceed $200 million in stolen intellectual property. TechFlow represents his most ambitious target due to the quantum computing applications. Emma leaned forward with her paralegal instincts engaged. What makes quantum computing different from his previous thefts? Agent Taylor consulted classified documents before responding carefully. Quantum computing technology has significant national defense applications. Unauthorized transfer of such technology to foreign entities constitutes federal espionage rather than simple corporate fraud. The investigation had moved rapidly once federal resources focused on Bradley's activities. His laptop, seized during the TechFlow raid, contained communications that stunned investigators with their boldness and scope. "We need you to review these research materials to confirm your sole authorship," Agent Taylor said, presenting thick folders of technical documentation. "Your original notebooks and development files will serve as crucial evidence establishing intellectual property theft." Hattie spent the next 3 hours examining her own work through the lens of federal crime investigation. Every algorithm, every innovation, every breakthrough she had developed became evidence in a case that increasingly resembled international espionage. "There's someone else you need to meet," Agent Taylor announced as they concluded the technical review. "Mary Chen, your former laboratory partner, contacted us after learning about the investigation." Mary entered the conference room with the nervous energy of someone whose world had been upended twice in recent months. Her termination the same day as Hattie's had seemed like unfortunate coincidence, but federal investigators saw different patterns. "Mary, can you repeat for Mrs. Richardson what Bradley offered you last month?" Agent Taylor prompted. Mary's voice shook slightly as she recounted events that now carried criminal implications. "Bradley approached me privately 3 weeks before the terminations. He offered me $50,000 to sign an affidavit claiming that Hattie's quantum computing research was collaborative work involving multiple team members. I refused because it wasn't true," Mary continued, looking directly at Hattie. "Your quantum computing breakthrough was entirely your individual work. I was working on completely different projects." Thomas made detailed notes as the conspiracy's scope became clearer. "What happened when you refused Bradley's offer?" "He said I was making a serious career mistake. The next day, HR called me for a meeting about performance concerns that had never been mentioned before. A week later, I was terminated for the same alleged issues." Agent Taylor presented additional evidence that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. "Our investigation reveals that Bradley Carson was systematically eliminating witnesses to his planned intellectual property theft. His timeline suggests he intended to claim credit for Hattie's innovations after removing both original inventors." The federal case expanded dramatically when investigators examined Bradley's personal finances. Bank records showed payments from offshore accounts connected to foreign technology companies seeking American innovations. "The quantum computing research has attracted international attention due to its potential military applications," Agent Taylor explained. "Several foreign entities have approached Bradley about acquiring this technology through unofficial channels." Hattie struggled to process that her scientific research had become the center of an international espionage investigation. The algorithms she developed for improving computer processing speeds had applications in defense systems and national security infrastructure. "What happens now?" Thomas asked, though his legal experience suggested the case had moved beyond civil litigation into federal prosecution territory. Agent Taylor's phone buzzed with urgent notifications that changed his expression immediately. "We've just received approval for expanded search warrants." Bradley's communications suggest coordination with foreign competitors attempting to acquire American quantum computing technology illegally. Emma watched federal agents coordinate what was becoming a national security investigation. "How does this affect Hattie's employment situation with TechFlow?" "That's no longer the primary concern," Agent Taylor replied grimly. "If Bradley successfully transferred quantum computing research to foreign entities, Mrs. Richardson's innovations could already be in the hands of countries that pose strategic threats to American technological superiority. As the meeting concluded, Agent Taylor's final revelation sent chills through everyone present. Bradley Carson's laptop contained draft communications offering to sell Hattie's research to Chinese technology companies for $10 million. The transaction was scheduled for next week. Hattie realized her wrongful termination had inadvertently prevented the theft of American technological secrets that could have compromised national security. Her fight for personal justice had uncovered threats to the entire country's strategic advantages in quantum computing development. The drive home that evening passed in contemplative silence as the magnitude of the situation became clear. What began as corporate wrongdoing had evolved into federal espionage charges that would reshape multiple lives and companies. But there was still one more shock waiting in the complex web of corporate deception and international intrigue. The emergency board meeting convened at 7 in the morning in TechFlow's main conference room, with Richard Donovan facing 12 increasingly agitated board members who had received preliminary briefings about the federal investigation. The company's stock price had dropped 30% overnight as news of patent disputes and federal raids circulated through financial media. Board chairman William Foster, a 70-year-old venture capitalist who had guided TechFlow through previous crises, called the meeting to order with barely contained frustration. "Richard, explain how our chief technology innovation became the center of a federal espionage investigation," William demanded, his tone suggesting that leadership changes were under serious consideration. Richard consulted notes prepared by Susan Park as Bradley's arrest the previous evening dominated morning business news. Bradley Carson engaged in systematic fraud, document forgery, and attempted technology theft. His actions have created massive legal and financial exposure that threatens company survival. Board member Jennifer Hayes, representing the pension fund investment, voiced concerns shared by multiple directors. "Our financial advisors estimate that losing access to Hattie Richardson's patents would reduce company valuation by 75%. Are we facing potential bankruptcy?" Susan Park addressed the board with legal assessments that painted an increasingly grim picture. "Without resolution of the patent ownership disputes, we cannot fulfill existing contracts worth $90 million. We also face potential lawsuits from clients who have advanced payments for technology we cannot legally deliver." The conference room's tension escalated when Richard's assistant announced an urgent call from Hattie Richardson's attorney requesting immediate negotiation. The board realized their former employee now held complete power over company survival. "Bring them in," William decided after brief consultation with fellow board members. "We need to understand exactly what resolution will require." Thomas Wright entered the boardroom accompanied by Hattie, Emma, and Agent Taylor, whose presence emphasized the federal implications of TechFlow's crisis. The dynamic in the room shifted dramatically as board members realized they were negotiating with someone who could determine their company's fate. "Mrs. Richardson, we appreciate your willingness to meet with us during this difficult situation," William began diplomatically. "We're prepared to discuss whatever arrangement will resolve the current disputes." Thomas presented a folder containing detailed financial analysis prepared by patent valuation experts. "Our preliminary assessment suggests TechFlow owes Mrs. Place, TechFlow owes Mrs. Richardson $26 million in unpaid licensing fees for existing patents plus damages for wrongful termination and fraud." Agent Taylor added federal context that intensified the negotiation. "The espionage investigation reveals that Mrs. Richardson's termination was part of a broader conspiracy to steal American technology for foreign competitors. Her patents have national security implications that affect potential resolution terms." Board member David Chang, representing Pinnacle Capital's $50 million investment, voiced concerns that reflected broader investor anxiety. "If Mrs. Richardson exercises her patent ownership rights, what happens to our existing client contracts?" Hattie spoke for herself for the first time, her voice steady despite the surreal circumstances. "I want justice for what Bradley Carson attempted, protection for other employees who suffered similar treatment, and recognition of my contributions to this company's success." Emma consulted legal documents as phone calls interrupted the meeting. "Mr. Donovan, you have urgent calls from Data Corp, Cloud Tech Solutions, and InnovateSoft. Their legal departments are demanding immediate clarification of patent ownership status." The board watched helplessly as their corporate partners threatened contract cancellations that would trigger immediate financial collapse. Decades of business development crumbled as patent disputes undermined the foundation of TechFlow's technology offerings. Thomas presented additional analysis that demonstrated Hattie's transformed position. Since yesterday, Mrs. Richardson has received acquisition offers for her quantum computing patent from Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. The bidding war currently exceeds $400 million. William Foster reviewed the numbers with growing amazement. Mrs. Richardson, you're saying that technology companies are offering nearly $500 million for patents you developed while employed here? That's correct, Thomas confirmed. The quantum computing patent has applications in artificial intelligence, defense systems, and financial modeling that make it extraordinarily valuable. Major corporations recognize that controlling this technology could provide competitive advantages worth billions. Richard watched his company's leverage disappear entirely as Hattie's options expanded beyond simple employment resolution. What would it take for you to maintain the existing licensing agreements and continue working with TechFlow? Hattie exchanged glances with Thomas before responding with terms that reflected her complete transformation from powerless employee to industry power player. I want full recognition as Chief Technology Officer, 40% equity stake in the company, and licensing agreements that fairly compensate me for future innovations. I also want guarantees that other employees will be protected from similar treatment. Agent Taylor's phone buzzed with updates that added another shocking dimension to the already complex situation. I've just received confirmation that Bradley Carson was recruited by TechFlow's primary competitor, Synertech Industries, specifically to steal Mrs. Richardson's patents and sabotage your company from within. The boardroom fell silent as the conspiracy's scope became clear. William Foster leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in disbelief. You're saying this entire crisis was orchestrated by our competitors? Synertech's CEO, Marcus Wheeler, faces federal charges for industrial espionage and conspiracy. The plan was to steal your quantum computing technology while destroying TechFlow's capability to compete in emerging markets. Richard realized their company had been targeted for destruction by competitors who understood the true value of Hattie's innovations before TechFlow's own leadership recognized it. How long has this conspiracy been active? At least 18 months, Agent Taylor replied. Synertech has been systematically targeting companies with breakthrough technologies, using inside operatives to steal intellectual property while eliminating competition. As the meeting continued, Hattie felt the complete reversal of her position from fired employee to the person who could save or destroy the company that had dismissed her so carelessly. The quantum computing patent that Bradley had tried to steal was becoming the foundation of her financial independence and professional vindication. The final revelation came when Agent Taylor announced that federal prosecutors were seeking 15-year sentences for Bradley Carson and Marcus Wheeler, charges that would send powerful messages about protecting American technological innovation from corporate espionage. Judge Patricia Stevens had mediated corporate disputes for 20 years, but rarely had she encountered negotiations where one individual held such complete power over a corporation's survival. The neutral conference room at her downtown law firm served as the venue for discussions that would determine TechFlow's fate and establish precedents for intellectual property protection. We're here to resolve the patent ownership disputes and employment issues arising from Mrs. Richardson's termination, Judge Stevens began, reviewing briefing materials that outlined the most complex case of her mediation career. David Chang from Pinnacle Capital had arrived with authorization to protect his firm's $50 million investment in TechFlow. His presence emphasized the broader financial implications of the negotiation as multiple parties watched for outcomes that would affect future technology investments. Mrs. Richardson, please outline your primary objectives for today's discussions, Judge Stevens requested. Hattie had spent weeks preparing for this moment, working with Thomas to develop negotiation strategies that balanced her desire for justice with practical business considerations. I want fair compensation for my intellectual property contributions, protection for other employees against similar treatment, and recognition of my role in developing TechFlow's core technologies. Richard Donovan consulted notes prepared by TechFlow's crisis management team, which had calculated that losing Hattie would result in immediate corporate bankruptcy. We're prepared to offer Mrs. Richardson the Chief Technology Officer position, a substantial equity stake, and comprehensive compensation for past patent usage. Thomas presented detailed financial analysis that demonstrated Hattie's extraordinary negotiating position. Our patent valuation experts estimate Mrs. Richardson's quantum computing patent alone could generate licensing revenue exceeding $1 billion over the next decade. Technology companies are prepared to pay premium rates for access to breakthrough quantum applications. Judge Stevens reviewed the federal investigation materials that added national security dimensions to the negotiation. The espionage charges against Bradley Carson and Synertech create unique circumstances that affect potential resolution terms. Agent Taylor provided updates that continued reshaping the case's scope. Federal prosecutors have identified communications showing that Synertech's conspiracy targeted 6 American technology companies over 8 years. The pattern suggests coordinated foreign intelligence efforts to acquire strategic technologies through corporate infiltration. David Chang addressed concerns that reflected broader investor anxiety about technology sector security. How can we ensure that future innovations are protected against similar espionage attempts? Federal prosecutor Amanda Walsh joined the negotiation as government interests aligned with protecting American technological advantages. Mrs. Richardson's case has highlighted vulnerabilities in corporate intellectual property protection that affect national security. Resolution should include safeguards preventing future technology theft. The negotiation dynamics shifted dramatically when Hattie received a phone call from Google's chief technology officer during a break in discussions. The tech giant's offer to purchase her quantum computing patent for $400 million, plus hiring her as director of quantum research, provided alternatives that eliminated her dependence on TechFlow entirely. Amazon just made a competing offer, Thomas announced after reviewing urgent messages. $500 million for exclusive quantum computing licensing rights, plus research funding for future innovations. Richard watched potential solutions slip away, as major technology companies offered Hattie opportunities that dwarfed anything TechFlow could provide. Mrs. Richardson, we understand you have options beyond continuing with our company. What would motivate you to remain with TechFlow? Hattie considered the question carefully, balancing financial opportunities against her desire to see justice served and other employees protected. I want to rebuild TechFlow into a company that values innovation and treats employees fairly, but I also want legal guarantees that prevent future misconduct. Judge Stevens facilitated discussions that addressed both immediate financial issues and long-term structural changes. The settlement should include compensation for past damages, arrangements for future collaboration, and systemic reforms preventing similar problems. The breakthrough came when federal investigators revealed the final piece of the conspiracy puzzle. Agent Taylor announced that Synertech's headquarters had been raided that morning, yielding evidence of the broader espionage network. We found detailed plans to recruit operatives at 12 American technology companies, Agent Taylor reported. The conspiracy included foreign intelligence services seeking quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and defense technologies. Amanda Walsh explained the government's perspective on resolution terms. Mrs. Richardson's case represents successful resistance to foreign technology theft. Federal authorities support arrangements that keep her innovations within American companies, while establishing protection standards for other potential targets. The negotiation reached its climax when investigators revealed that Bradley Carson had been videotaped attempting to transfer Hattie's quantum computing research to Chinese intelligence operatives. The evidence demonstrated that her termination had inadvertently prevented a major national security breach. The timing suggests that Mrs. Richardson's firing was intended to eliminate her as a witness to the planned technology transfer, Agent Taylor concluded. Her presence at TechFlow would have prevented the theft they were attempting to complete. Judge Stevens recognized the unique circumstances that gave Hattie extraordinary leverage while also serving national interests. Mrs. Richardson, you have the opportunity to establish precedents for protecting American innovation while achieving personal justice. As discussions continued into the evening, the framework for resolution began emerging. Hattie would retain significant patent rights while working with TechFlow to develop quantum computing applications for American clients. The company would implement comprehensive reforms protecting employee innovations and preventing future infiltration attempts. But the most satisfying element would be the criminal prosecution of those who had attempted to steal American technology while destroying the careers of innocent innovators. 6 months later, Hattie stood outside the federal courthouse in downtown Austin, watching as news crews documented Bradley Carson's sentencing hearing. The journey from wrongful termination to this moment of justice had transformed not only her own life but established precedents that would protect countless other innovators from similar exploitation. Inside the courtroom, Federal Judge Maria Rodriguez delivered sentences that sent clear messages about protecting American technological advantages from corporate espionage. Bradley Carson received 12 years in federal prison for charges including industrial espionage, patent fraud, document forgery, and attempted sale of classified technology to foreign entities. Mr. Carson, your actions threatened not only individual employees but national security interests, Judge Rodriguez stated before pronouncing sentence. Your systematic targeting of American innovations for foreign competitors represents exactly the type of economic espionage that federal law was designed to prevent. Synertech CEO Marcus Wheeler received an even harsher 15-year sentence for orchestrating the broader conspiracy that had targeted multiple technology companies. The federal investigation revealed that his company had served as a front for foreign intelligence services, seeking American quantum computing and artificial intelligence research. The evidence demonstrates a deliberate pattern of targeting American technological innovation for theft and transfer to hostile foreign entities, Judge Rodriguez continued. Such actions undermine the foundation of American competitive advantages in critical technology sectors. The financial penalties were equally devastating. Synertech faced criminal fines exceeding $200 million, while civil lawsuits from targeted companies would likely force complete corporate dissolution. Bradley Carson's personal assets were seized to compensate victims of his fraud schemes across multiple companies. But for Hattie, the most meaningful justice came through the transformation of TechFlow itself. As the company's new chief technology officer and 40% equity holder, she had implemented comprehensive reforms that protected employee innovations while fostering collaborative research environments. I never imagined that fighting for my own rights would lead to protecting so many other people, Hattie reflected during her testimony at the sentencing hearing. But that's exactly what happened, and it proves that standing up to injustice can create positive change that extends far beyond individual circumstances. The financial settlements had exceeded everyone's expectations. TechFlow's board agreed to pay $26 million in unpaid licensing fees, plus an additional $30 million in damages for wrongful termination and fraud. Her quantum computing patent, exclusively licensed to the United States government for defense applications, generated $300 million in guaranteed payments over 5 years. The licensing agreements for her existing patents produced steady revenue streams totaling approximately $40 million annually as major corporations competed for access to her innovations. Technology industry analysts estimated that her total patent portfolio could generate more than $1 billion in licensing revenue over the next decade. Mary Chen joined TechFlow as lead developer, under the new employment protections that Hattie insisted upon. Other employees who had suffered under Bradley's regime received promotions and compensation adjustments that recognized their true contributions to company success. Watching Hattie fight back inspired all of us to value our own work more highly, Mary explained to business journalists covering the case. She showed that brilliant employees don't have to accept unfair treatment just because they love their work. The personal transformation proved as significant as the professional vindication. Thomas Wright had joined TechFlow as general counsel, and their working relationship had evolved into something deeper as they collaborated on building ethical business practices that protected both innovation and the people who created it. I've learned that my greatest strength isn't just technical innovation, but the courage to fight for what's right even when the odds seem impossible, Hattie told the audience at a national conference of female engineers. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that happens to you. The ripple effects extended throughout the technology industry as other companies implemented similar employee protection policies to avoid federal scrutiny. Patent attorneys began insisting on intellectual property clauses that fairly compensated inventors, while federal agencies increased oversight of foreign attempts to acquire American innovations through corporate infiltration. TechFlow's corporate culture transformation served as a model for ethical technology development. Employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements as innovation teams gained confidence that their contributions would be recognized and fairly compensated. The company's valuation tripled as investors recognized the value of ethical leadership and comprehensive patent protection. Hattie established the Richardson Innovation Foundation using a portion of her settlement funds to provide scholarships for women pursuing science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. The foundation also funded legal assistance for employees facing intellectual property disputes with unscrupulous employers. My story proves that one person standing up against injustice can create positive change that protects many others, Hattie concluded during her keynote address at the National Women in Technology Summit. When someone tries to steal your work or diminish your contributions, remember that your innovations have value that extends far beyond any single job or company. The federal investigation continued expanding as investigators identified additional targets of foreign technology espionage efforts. Hattie's case became the foundation for legislation strengthening protection of American intellectual property and imposing severe penalties on companies that facilitate technology theft. 5 years after her wrongful termination, Hattie's net worth exceeded $500 million through patent licensing and equity appreciation. TechFlow had become the leading ethical technology company in artificial intelligence development, with employee protection policies that attracted the industry's most talented innovators. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was receiving the Technology Innovator of the Year award from the National Academy of Engineering, recognition that acknowledged not only her technical brilliance, but her courage in fighting corporate corruption that threatened American technological leadership. Sometimes what feels like your greatest defeat is actually the universe preparing you for your greatest victory, Hattie reflected during her acceptance speech. When someone tries to take credit for your work, don't just defend yourself. Use it as an opportunity to discover your true worth. The same intelligence that created something valuable once will create something even more valuable when backed by experience and determination. Standing on stage before an audience of the nation's leading engineers and innovators, Hattie realized that Bradley Carson's attempt to destroy her career had instead launched her transformation into one of the most powerful voices for protecting American innovation and the brilliant minds who make it possible. The young woman who had once been escorted out of her own building by security had become someone whose story would inspire future generations of innovators to stand up for their rights and fight for the recognition their contributions deserved. Her journey from devastation to triumph proved that sometimes the greatest injustices become catalysts for the most meaningful victories, especially when combined with intelligence, determination, and the courage to never surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. Justice had been served not only in courtrooms but in boardrooms, laboratories, and most importantly, in the minds of countless other innovators who learned that their work had value worth fighting to protect. Have you ever had to fight for recognition of your own contributions at work or in your personal life? I'd love to hear about your experiences standing up for what you believed was right, even when it felt impossible. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to give up when facing seemingly impossible odds, and share this with anyone who might need inspiration to stand up for their own worth. Thank you for joining me on this journey of justice and transformation, and remember that your innovations and contributions have value that no one should be able to take away from you.